see them at the grocery store, in the mall, at the movie theater. You walk right by because they look just like you.
I think parents need to stop thinking, not my kid, because it could be your kid.
But for too many families in Maryland, heroin is ripping them apart at the seams.
I never thought I would be the mother of a dead child. But that's just what life handed me.
Our community is in crisis with too many teens, too many young adults chasing the high.
Good evening, I'm Kelly Swoop.
And I'm Jamie Costello. Like it or not, our community is in crisis.
So many chasing the heroin high, and our best defense as parents, as leaders, as teachers is knowledge.
In the next hour, you're going to meet the moms, the dads who have had to bury their child because of heroin. Now, these moms and dads aren't sitting back. They're joining in on this fight, working to make sure nobody else's son or daughter dies from this horrible drug.
Maryland leaders are also in this fight for you, for your family, for your future. We're going to take a look at efforts to treat addicts with methadone and efforts to raise awareness county by county.
And as the saying goes, home is where our story begins, in living rooms, around kitchen tables, and in bedrooms that stand as a reminder of lives lost. We focus first on some of the families whose lives changed forever because of the decision to give heroin a try, hoping now that their living nightmare will start the conversation in your home. Katrina Bush with the story of one mother's lost Danny boy.
That's where he was most.
When you ask Toni Torsch about her son Dan, she smiles.
I love talking about Dan, my Danny boy.
She talks about his smile, how funny he was. But as she puts it, Dan had a disease of addiction.
When he was still in high school, he was a senior in high school.
Toni says he got injured on the soccer field. She and her husband later found out the addiction started after Dan finished his oxycodone prescription. It ballooned out of control from there.
It was September after graduation in December of 2009. He got out on February 13th. Dan called on September 25th.
She remembers the timeline of events like it's a list she just drew up this morning, down to the day. She's not sure how she remembers these dates so well. There were years Dan was in and out of treatment. Sometimes he was willing, other times he was not, but every time he would relapse.
It was just a never-ending cycle.
The date that no doubt stands out the most for the Torsch family came toward the end of 2010.
On December 3rd,
she says the images of that day are burned into her memory. Dan was back home from a treatment facility in Florida.
And when he walked through those doors, it was just, I mean, I remember saying to my husband later that night, life is good. I mean, life was good again.
Toni was going to run an errand with Dan, so she knocked on his bedroom door. There was no answer, so she went in to find what she thought was her sleeping son, but something wasn't
Dan,
right.
Wake up.
And I kept saying, you know, wake up.
Wake up.
And I touched him, and something just didn't feel right. And I yelled for my son, and he came in, and he just yelled,
Call 911.
Call 911.
Paramedics worked on Dan in the house before taking him to the hospital.
So we're just sitting there, and the doctor came in, and she just said, I'm sorry. We couldn't do anything. We couldn't save him.
Dan was 24.
You know, when Dan was going through addiction, I thought I was just living through hell. Sleeping with my pocketbook, hiding my car keys, hiding my car, hiding his car. And I would think this must be what hell is. But it's not. It's not until you have to say a final goodbye to your children. I mean, that's what hell is.
A hell she never imagined her family being in. Still, it was 8 months later that she started the Daniel Carl Torsch Foundation. She says she wanted to make sure his death counted for something. The goal of the foundation is to provide drug overdose prevention and awareness, help low-income adults access substance abuse treatment, and advocate for naloxone, also known as Narcan, the opioid reversal drug.
And really, if it's given in time, this will bring them immediately out of an overdose.
Naloxone has not always been as accessible as it is today. Tony hadn't even heard about it until after Dan died. That's when she researched and learned about the drug.
I don't know what would have happened if I'd had naloxone at home at that time. Maybe I'm not sitting here. Maybe it would have helped him. I just don't know.
She says she found it was only available in Baltimore City, and doctors could only write the prescription to the person in addiction, not a third party. They got a bill passed, and that changed.
I look at our work, because it wasn't just me. There was a solid group of people that spent a lot of time in Annapolis talking to our legislators and convincing them that this is what needs to be done. And so every time I hear another person being rescued with naloxone, I know that we had a part of that.
And then you stop.
It was an accomplishment that led to training sessions like these in Baltimore County. They are opioid overdose response trainings.
Right now, we have 2 more trainings that are planned. However, we get requests every day from people saying, hey, when's the next one? Is there something sooner? I see there's one next month, but what about next week? Out of the 35 classes that we've held since June 2014, we have trained 700 people.
For Tony, that's what it's all about. She knows the drug isn't the answer to addiction. Maybe being jolted out of an overdose won't have any lasting impact right away, but it will give the person a chance. It's how she knows we're headed in the right direction, with more people being trained, she says, and a governor who seems to be on board. But there's still a long way to go. In Baltimore County, Katrina Bush, ABC 2 News.
Tony says she has a very short wish list today. Aside from having her son back, she wants to see immediate access to long-term treatment for anyone who wants it.
She'd also like to see one central office in the state to handle calls and help people navigate through services, no matter where they live. One county away, a tragically similar story. Another mother remembers how her son's heroin addiction started and the day when it all tragically ended. ABC 2 News' Catherine Hawley with Nolan's story and a tree that stands as a sober reminder of heroin's hold on Harford County.
At first glance, this tree in the middle of the Harford Mall looks like a decoration for Valentine's Day. But when you take a closer look, you see words like lonely and pain. It may seem grim, but the point is to get people talking.
54 hearts, and almost half show faces. Faces with smiles full of promise.
You would never guess that these people had a drug problem.
It's a problem with a tight grip in Harford County. And many of these faces struggled with a heroin addiction.
I think when people think of heroin, they think of somebody laying in an inner city gutter, and that is not these kids.
With its bright lights and giant candy hearts, the group that displayed the conversation tree wants people to ask questions, because then they can be informed about heroin's hold and possibly prevent another family from heartbreak.
To me, it is far better to have your 15-year-old mad at you because you went through his phone than to find your 15-year-old dead from an overdose.
Understand that it's a real problem and not something we should hide, not something that we should think is taboo as a subject. We need to talk about drugs in our community.
It's eye-opening, but it's the attention heroin abuse needs.
We busted the door in and Nolan was slumped over, hanging out of a chair, really almost dead. And that was the first clue that we had that he had a problem with heroin.
That was Nolan's first overdose on the deadly drug. It was 3 years ago.
Go from a healthy person with a full face to skin and bones.
Sitting in her son's now empty bedroom, Sandy Gallion says Nolan's troubles started after a minor car crash in 2010. He was taken to the hospital for whiplash and walked out with a prescription for pain pills that he was soon a slave to.
He started doctor shopping. looking for the medication.
And it wasn't long before he traded the narcotic pain meds for a cheaper version, heroin, and he was hooked.
The moment you try heroin, it's almost a death sentence.
Nolan was working as an EMT and a volunteer firefighter.
He was top 10 fire, top 10 EMS.
He worked to save people's lives, yet doing a drug that eventually took his. The teen struggled to stay sober.
This picture there, you can tell by his eyes and his face that he was using in both of these.
After his first overdose and first round of rehab, Sandy says her son's sole focus was to feed his drug habit. Finally, after nearly 2 years of chasing the high, Nolan had enough.
He decided that he couldn't live the life like that anymore, and that was his decision.
This time, he flew out to California for an intense inpatient and outpatient rehab program. The 24-year-old made it more than 6 months sober, but his family will never have answers about why Nolan decided to shoot up again.
He was doing what was supposed to be right. He was going to meetings. He had a sponsor. You know, he was loving life again. And, you know, I guess the call of the drug is more than what anybody realizes.
Nolan was at the firehouse he volunteered at, and Sandy found him after he missed curfew. He was in the bathroom, just out of reach.
I called his phone. It rang. I could hear it ringing. I banged on the door. I even took a fire extinguisher, tried to beat the door in. I couldn't get in the door, you know, and I called my husband and said, "You need to come down here. I don't think it's good."
It wasn't. Nolan died from a heroin overdose on January 25th, 2015.
That vision, though, doesn't go away. The vision that you see and the vision of him dead in the ER doesn't change. It doesn't go away, you know, it just... You close your eyes and you can still see it today.
It's painful and it hurts.
You know, a parent shouldn't have to do CPR on their own child.
The Gallions hope their story, Nolan's story, will sound the alarm for families who think heroin can't touch them. Catherine Hawley, ABC 2 News.
Now, studies show that heroin has a nearly 80% relapse rate.
So that's why we have to talk about it. If you want to check out the conversation tree and start the conversation up at home, it's on display at the Harford Mall through the end of this month. 2 moms forever linked by the loss of their children to heroin.
And while heroin is not a new problem, it now has everyone's attention.
I really want to make sure we save that next generation.
Saving the next generation, that's what this is all about. A look at efforts across the state to end the cycle of abuse.
To administer the Narcan and see him come back to life. You see the color come back in his face.
And we're on the front lines with our police and emergency crews to see just how naloxone is being used to save lives. So throughout the show, we're going to give you information on where you can get help in your area. And even after tonight, you can find it online at abc2news.com/heroin.
State leaders are now working on new ways to help families and communities find light at the end of the tunnel.
Leading the charge, Lieutenant Governor Boyd Rutherford. Brendan McNamara now with changes that could be coming to Maryland.
State lawmakers are taking up legislation in this session to help prevent the spread of the heroin epidemic. The governor's office is proposing changes to the way law enforcement investigates and the way you get your medicine.
It's troubling hearing the kids. It's worse hearing the parents. Particularly the parents who lost a child.
In Annapolis, state leaders say they're listening to cries for help from friends and loved ones losing their own to heroin at a record pace.
They felt they'd never take heroin, but then they found that they were first sniffing heroin or snorting heroin. And then while they were doing that, they said, well, I'll never shoot it in my vein with a needle. And then they found out that find themselves doing those same things.
Lieutenant Governor Boyd Rutherford chairs the state's heroin task force, one of 2 teams formed early last year by executive order to share ideas and come up with new ones.
We have to stop the pipeline of new users. You know, we can address or work on addressing those who are using and try to get them into rehabilitation, into rehab of some sort, and treatment, drug treatment.
It's my opinion heroin is the #1 threat to Maryland.
James Pyle with the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene sits on the second team, the Heroin and Opioid Coordinating Council. He says Maryland heroin deaths increased by 95% from 2010 to 2013, making the drug now more deadly than violent crime and car crashes.
Consistently throughout Maryland, it was heroin. It's in every county, every community in Maryland. There's no community, no county that's immune from this disease.
After 10 months of research, the task force asked for 27 policy changes and 5 new laws. Among the most major proposals, forcing doctors to check patient drug history before prescribing opiates or painkillers. Rutherford says 70 to 80% of heroin users start on prescription drugs, but that could change if doctors are on the lookout in the exam room.
When a person comes in and they have an issue and they need the pain medication, that the doctor goes into the system to see if this same person has been getting opiates someplace else. It also allows them to think in terms of how much this person may be being prescribed.
A second potential change focuses on locking up drug dealers. The proposed legislation would give state attorneys the freedom to attack the flow of heroin coming from outside their jurisdiction. Now, breaking up the drug trade in more than one county at a time can get caught up in legal red tape, keeping those operations alive.
In this case, you can bring down the whole enterprise, and you're able to seize their money and their assets, which is really the lifeblood of these criminal organizations.
Rutherford says not all new ideas are focused on preventing heroin use, but also improving treatment for those already addicted. One challenge is getting people help immediately once they decide they want it.
They reach a point where they say, I know I can't keep doing this forever, but I don't want to get sick. I don't want to go into withdrawal. So I'm ready to go to treatment of some sort. So I need treatment now.
Rutherford says the state is closely watching a pilot program spearheaded by the Baltimore Health Department. Soon, the city will open a drug stabilization center specifically designed for and available to heroin users.
In the ER, all we can do is address their life-threatening conditions, but we don't have the resources, and it's not the best space to address someone's ongoing addiction and mental health needs.
The city secured $3.6 million for the project, but it's still unclear if it can be copied throughout the state.
We've talked about utilizing some of the rehabilitation centers because they have more locations as stabilization, a place that a person can be stabilized and then move to a treatment center. It's already against the law to sell heroin. So legislation is not going to be the answer alone.
The governor's office says it needs about $5 million more to implement all of the task force recommendations, but some of those recommendations are already in effect. Brendan McNamara, ABC 2 News.
The fight for change is happening at all levels.
Ahead, Charlie Krausen will sit down with Harford County Sheriff Jeffrey Gaylor. And later, for many, getting off of heroin means getting on methadone. Each day, 2,200 people come to this church in Baltimore for methadone.
2,200 people looking for liquid methadone so they don't shoot up. No place has seen heroin's grip tighten faster than Harford County. The drug is so pervasive there that Sheriff Jeffrey Gaylor has made eradicating the problem a top priority. Last spring, Gaylor formed the Hope for Harford work group to attack the epidemic. Charlie Krausen sat down with the sheriff to talk about where things stand in the department's fight against heroin.
Clearly, the issue of heroin addiction, overdoses, and the battle against it, something you guys deal with on a daily basis. What do you and your deputies see out there on the streets?
Well, since taking office in 2014, I knew it was a big problem having run for the office, but we put some steps in place to try to get a grasp on just how big the problem is. And as the numbers started to click in, and we know these are just the numbers that we see, there's others out there that we're not getting, it's overwhelming.
Putting it in the terms of numbers, what are some of those numbers you guys are seeing?
We responded to 201 throughout the year 2015, 201 overdoses, 28 of those resulting in the loss of life. we're on pace this year with 27 overdoses and 4 fatalities to be just a little ahead of that pace from last year, which is not the direction we want to be taking for sure. We want to curb that number.
Toward training your officers in response to this, you changed protocol, didn't you?
We were able to change a protocol where once a law enforcement response takes place, the task force is notified and they send an investigator out. And the investigator has a much more specialized skill set, training to know what to look for, what kind of questions to ask, to kind of help us. One, we want to steer these people, if they survive, toward treatment. And then second, to target those who are dealing this drug in our community.
Some of these stories have to be heartbreaking.
It's never been cheaper, it's never been more plentiful, and it's never been more pure. And because of that, we are seeing more overdoses and deaths related to heroin than ever before. And it doesn't discriminate. You know, it doesn't discriminate based on age, geographic location where you live in the county, on race, on sex. Unfortunately, this drug is so powerful that once you become addicted to it, it's virtually impossible to get away from it. My task force guys and ladies are running around the clock. They do an outstanding job. And again, we have the allies in with us to help with that effort. Law enforcement has its part, but we're not going to solve it alone with law enforcement.
Well, the sheriff just said it. We'll say it again. Heroin knows no boundaries. Age, sex, race, it really doesn't matter. From the Eastern Shore all the way out to the mountains of Western Maryland, we all feel the impact.
Prescription drugs turned into heroin pretty quickly.
Mickey, he is one of the lucky ones. You're going to hear his story of recovery next.
It's a problem all over the state, but it really has been a tough start to the year in Washington County.
Already in this month of February, Washington County has seen 28 overdoses. That's more than one a day. At least 3 overdoses were deadly, and several people who overdosed were brought back by emergency responders, and in some cases, friends or family using Narcan. Let's compare that to January, where Washington County had 9 overdoses. Now let's take you to the beautiful town of Easton on the shore, the birthplace of former Governor Harry Hughes, James Rouse, who taught us how to live next door to one another, and Harold Baines. And despite the paradise that is Maryland's Eastern Shore, heroin has its hold on some in the community. 36 heroin-related deaths in just 9 months of 2015. ABC 2 News' Don Harrison tells us how the land of pleasant living can put us on an island of darkness.
The Chesapeake separates Queen Anne's County from Anne Arundel, Baltimore County, and Baltimore City. But as massive as the Bay is, it can't stop the heroin epidemic from making its way to the Eastern Shore.
You just never knew what was going to happen next.
Kate Ryan is speaking about the difficulties heroin has brought to her family. She spent 20 years as a Baltimore County police officer and the last 2 decades as a substance abuse counselor on the Eastern Shore, the last 10 with the Queen Anne's County Health Department. She personally has been affected by the heroin problem on the Eastern Shore 3 times.
Well, for the last 10 years, 3 of my 4 children have kind of been in and out of rehab and in and out of using heroin.
Probably 2 years after I got out of high school, a kid younger than me overdosed and died. And
Mickey is one of Kate's 4 children. He fell under the effects of heroin, but the future is brighter for him now. He's clean.
Celebrating his anniversary, this 5-year anniversary this weekend.
But times weren't always so fortunate for Kate.
There was a couple times that, I felt like we weren't going to make it through this.
Wondering when her children would hit rock bottom and what that would mean.
Well, the problem with waiting until you're rock bottom for a heroin addict is that might mean that you're meeting them at the morgue.
Fortunately, that did not happen. Mickey is clean and can now reflect how heroin took over his life.
Started experimenting more, found prescription drugs, and prescription drugs turned into heroin pretty quickly.
Mickey had to go to Baltimore to get his heroin, not now for others here on the shore.
They're saying they're getting it right in this town or right, just all over the shore. So I've seen it basically travel from over there to over here. And I feel like it's gotten pretty readily available over here. People that are younger than me overdosing and never you know, they're gone forever. It's sad.
This is occurring in almost every area of our county.
And when it does come to the shore, the first one to deal with it is Gary Hoffman, the sheriff for Queen Anne's County.
It doesn't know any socioeconomic boundaries. Heroin is one of those things that I've had the poorest of the poorest from my county in here to some of the wealthiest of the wealthiest.
Here in Queen Anne's County, we should be talking about how the crab population is going instead of people dying. On average, the health department sees 600 people a year with alcohol and drug issues. About a third of them are for heroin and opiate problems. Hoffman says it's not just heroin use that affects his county, it's what comes with heroin users.
It's increasing our crime numbers because people are becoming dependent on heroin. They've lost their financial means to support that, and now all of a sudden they've got to go start stealing or committing other crimes to support their habit.
Well, the heroin's really started to take over the county on a lot of levels.
This undercover narcotics officer for Queen Anne's County, we'll call him Wally, says he's locked up hundreds in these jail cells. Heroin affects all segments of Queen Anne's County.
We see everybody from, like I said, the kids up to prominent business people.
In almost his decade of law enforcement in the county, he's seen the worst.
The heroin's it's really taken over. It's taken over every aspect of what we do. We can probably attribute most of our crime to drugs, especially heroin.
We encourage them to get mental health.
Sheriff Hoffman's focus is to inform the people of his county.
Education and awareness. We're getting the message out there to the community members that this is a deadly addiction.
Sheriff Hoffman tells me that when he's talking with parents that are dealing with heroin issues in their family, he says they have two choices. They can ignore it and start planning a funeral, or they can decide to deal with the problem and look for a better future. In Queen Anne's County, Don Harrison, ABC 2 News.
All right, let's come across the bay now to Anne Arundel County, where they are trying to get ahead of the growing heroin problem.
That's right. In July of 2014, the state changed the guidelines so that all EMTs would be allowed to administer naloxone. Anne Arundel Fire didn't wait. Ahead of schedule, they equipped all first responders with this life-saving dose of Narcan.
When the call comes, firefighter EMTs from Engine 31 in Brooklyn are ready. Whether it's a fire, a heart attack, or an overdose, their trucks are equipped and their people ready to respond.
In it, we believe that it is saving lives and making a difference.
The it, Captain Davies says, is naloxone, or Narcan. 2 years ago, Anne Arundel County Fire added the drug to its arsenal of life-saving tools. While paramedics have been trained to administer Narcan since the 1980s, now EMTs can treat patients with the drug that reverses the effects of a heroin or opioid overdose. Davies says they needed it.
The department runs about 80,000 calls a year. We've administered the drug on 800 of those calls, and in 80 of those instances, it was administered by an EMT basic, someone who 2 years ago wouldn't have been able to administer that drug.
With dozens of heroin-related deaths, Davies says Anne Arundel County hasn't been left out of the epidemic sweeping the state.
It used to have a stigma attached to it that it was a street drug, that it was, you know, people that you found at abandoned houses, that you found in alleys. Now it's pervasive in any segment of the community. Any part of the county, you could see a heroin overdose.
First responders like Officer Gina Chen are also carrying Narcan. Just 3 months after the fire department in 2014, the Anne Arundel County Police Department was the first and largest force in the state to arm its officers with Narcan. Chen has already saved lives.
It was reported as a possible heroin overdose. So immediately going into the home, I came in with my Narcan, which I actually keep right in reach, just so it's quick. I know exactly where it is every time. So I grabbed it, ran in the home. The male was on the floor, unresponsive.
With one burst into each nostril, the mist works within a minute.
It is amazing to see. You see someone blue who essentially is going to die without your assistance, and to do something as simple as this is to administer the Narcan and to see them come back to life. You see the color come back in his face, and he's eventually talking to you.
For some, it is a quick, temporary fix until their next high. For others, hopefully a life-saving wake-up call.
as a police officer, you take an oath to save a life, and it's not my idea to judge who deserves to live and die. My job is to save lives, no matter who that person is.
So wide-reaching. Every county in our state is fighting heroin.
And in Harford County, education efforts are now paying off.
In 2015, county leaders held a series of town halls, launched public service campaigns, and started talking to middle school students about heroin use. You see, while they were making headway with older teens and people in their early 20s, they saw an alarming number of middle school students giving heroin a try. Kids as young as 11 tried drugs here in Harford County.
I can remember that decision to do the first billboard with a young person on there and telling parents to begin to talk to their children about heroin. And like any family, there is a discussion. Some folks think, you know, you shouldn't do that. It's not something you need to publicize or talk about.
And publicizing the impact is starting the conversation. This is the reminder that sits on Route 40 right outside the Southern Precinct. The number of heroin overdoses and deaths already for 2016.
Between January and September of 2015, there were 527 heroin-related deaths in Maryland.
The final tally for 2015 is still being calculated and will come out in the next few months.
I wish there was not this monster called heroin.
But there is this monster. Ahead, a look at the thousands here at home turning to medically assisted treatment.
I hope that they're inspired to have those conversations and to seek help if they need it.
And if you needed more inspiration to start the conversation up, we've got it for you in the form of a play and up-and-coming actors. Long before we read headlines about addicts dying of overdoses out in the suburbs, heroin ravaged large portions of inner-city Baltimore.
On the front lines of the battle against heroin is the Reverend Milton Williams and his New Life Evangelical Church.
Now, part of the church's outreach includes the massive Turning Point Clinic.
Christian Schaefer was granted exclusive access behind the scenes of the clinic, which serves more than 2,000 people every day.
I wish there was not this monster called heroin. But it's not going anywhere. This thing is alive and well.
At the Turning Point Clinic in East Baltimore, a weapon deployed against that monster comes in small plastic cups. The red liquid is methadone, administered to some 2,200 people here every day.
We are the largest methadone clinic on planet Earth.
The clinic assigns each patient a number, which in most cases is matched with their Medicare or Medicaid status. They have to be sober, so there's a breathalyzer test. Then the dose goes through the heavy glass partition. Most of the time, patients drink it right at the window.
It stops what's called the withdrawal symptoms, the cravings that causes an addict to go back into the street, back into the alley, commit violent crimes in order to get that fix.
There is a line to get in, a waiting room, and 8 windows, staffed 12 hours a day, 6 days a week.
Managing 2,200 addicts, 2,200 former heroin users is a daunting task.
And the clinic is not just managing their methadone intake. Patients are also encouraged to attend daily church services. Reverend Milton Williams runs the massive clinic as part of his New Life Evangelical Church.
We include the Lord Jesus Christ. This is a spiritually based program that we recognize that people who are addicted need more than counseling. They need more than methadone. They need God in order to fully recover from this awful monster that's on their back.
Patients with children can bring them to an on-site daycare center. There's a food pantry that includes breakfast and lunch service and counseling sessions.
But how have you used it has impacted your life in a negative way?
which are mandatory. The clinic granted ABC2 exclusive access to this session. Participants agreed to allow their conversations to be recorded.
Even though I used, I never enjoyed it. I never enjoyed drugs, man. Right. I used to use and get high and ask myself, why, man? You know, why?
Conversations about ruined family functions.
When you use and you don't care about stuff like that. I know I didn't. What about Christmas? Okay, oh well, give me $10. You know, because I know on Christmas people got money.
Some of my family members, when I was out there, they didn't want me around.
It's clear that even after getting into treatment, the struggle continues every day.
Some days do I think about using? Yes, I do. Because if a baseball player break his arm and he's home, the first thing he's gonna think about is doing what? Playing ball. Right. You know, so, but that's all I do. I don't act on what I think.
But everyone here said their lives had improved since they started coming to Turning Point.
I just started doing everything, coming to the groups, drinking my Met when I'm supposed to drink it. You know, I just started participating, going to the church service, and eventually I didn't want to use. And if I used, I felt that guilt.
But now that I'm in recovery now, and 2 years now, and now they have no problem with being around me, and it's all good now.
These group sessions and, you know, going to the spirituality groups and everything, man, you know, it helps. It put me right back where I needed to be at, man, you know.
Nationally, there is a debate over the effectiveness of using methadone and other drugs like it to treat heroin addiction. Some states adhere to what's called abstinence-based treatment, better known as cold turkey. In Maryland, city and state health officials say research has shown that medical-assisted treatment works better. To continue distributing methadone, Milton Williams Clinic must maintain licenses with the city, state, and federal governments.
And do we want to treat this thing with compassion, or do we want to just act like it doesn't exist and take those who are addicted to heroin, call them dope fiends, and just ignore them?
Williams says the typical heroin user uses the drug several times every day. He compares daily methadone treatments to the medication taken by people who have high blood pressure or insulin used by diabetics. For now, he says Medicaid and Medicare pay for the methadone in full for almost every patient here, but he's heard of proposals at the federal level that would cut those reimbursements by half.
Which is going to translate into hurting people who are not part of the problem. So we don't want to send heroin addicts back on the street to their former life to provide for a craving, a withdrawal that must be satisfied. It's going to be satisfied.
And while he does acknowledge that there are patients here who just want the methadone,
we have to accept the reality that a bad addict in treatment is better than a bad addict not in treatment.
He says in many cases, addicts eventually reach what he calls a moment of clarity, in which they realize there's more to recovery than just a daily shot of red liquid.
There are myriads of problems on top of problems on top of problems that we're faced with, and we're doing all we can to resolve as many as we can.
Reverend Williams says his next step is to open a primary care clinic close to the methadone clinic he's operating right now. He says he needs some help from the state to get that started, but eventually he believes that will save the state money because it would keep those hundreds and hundreds of uninsured patients who use his clinic out of the local emergency rooms. Christian Schaefer, ABC 2 News.
Talking to teens about the dangers of drug and alcohol abuse isn't the easiest thing. You know, many parents are guilty of saying, not my child, he would never do that, until he does.
Addicted. It is a play tackling the difficult subjects, drawing directly from the personal experiences of the cast and crew. Trang Do sat down with the writer and actors, bringing this powerful and eye-opening play to life.
After school, at any given high school across the country, there's likely to be a drama practice going on.
Wherever that it feels organic for you. So if this is a part where you have more energy and you want to move, then go ahead and do that.
But at North Harford High School, the work being performed isn't a fairy tale. Far from it.
You turn into somebody else. You do things that you never thought you would do.
It's all too real for the students and alumni performing in Addicted. School psychologist Crystal Hensel wrote the play 3 years ago based on her own family's experience.
My brother struggled with addiction, so it was really through his story and so many others around us that I was really inspired to write about addiction, because it's an epidemic that we're faced with and it touches so many people's lives.
I'll take it day by day.
I don't want to die a junkie with a needle in my arm.
They call it a disease. I call it a party.
The play features 3 main characters, each battling an addiction.
I know I've been in rehab before, but something's different.
11th grader Jill Nooney plays Jessica, a prescription pill addict.
I just remember watching it and being like, I want that part, because, you know, like, addiction's a real problem, and I've seen it in my family, and when I saw the play, I cried. It got me, and I wanted to be a part of that because it's important.
The truth is, I didn't want to see. I didn't want to see what was happening.
Addicted is a passion project for Cassidy McGinty, who not only plays a role, but also edited the latest version of the play.
2 of my uncles actually both died from heroin addiction, so I thought that it was kind of my duty, my obligation to do this play, like just to audition for it.
That painful family history inspired McGinty to help Hensel create a new character.
I actually play my grandmother in this play. Like, my grandmother was a heroin addict's mother, and just, that is so real to me. Like, that's how I get into it.
Harford County is trying to spread awareness of the dangers of drug and alcohol abuse as early as possible. A 2013 survey found an alarming percentage of middle school students in Harford County admitting to trying drugs and alcohol.
You know, they open up a room.
Joe Ryan, manager of Harford County's Office of Drug Control Policy, says the play is a unique way to start a conversation between young people and their parents.
We can all have teachers, you know, lecture. You know, we can have government officials, you know, talk to kids, but the kids really get engaged in this play. It's very well done.
McGinty says the play deeply affected her when she first saw it. She hopes it does the same for her peers.
I think the reason that this play is so important is because that play, it just destroys the no consequences part. Because there are consequences. There are consequences to yourself, to your family, to the people you love, and it'll ruin your life.
Trang Do, ABC 2 News.
Families really need to check that out. There are several scheduled performances of Addicted coming up. You can see it at North Harford High School tomorrow at 7 o'clock. Mount Zion Church in Bel Air will host the play on March 11th and 12th at 7 p.m. and admission is free.
Our hope for you and your family is that this show serves as a conversation starter.
And it's just a start, but we're going to be here. We're going to help you keep the conversation going. Head to our website at abcnews.com/heroin. You'll find all the stories that we just brought you, plus a host of resources for wherever you live.
Remember, by talking about it, maybe we can prevent one more lost life.